Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Once Upon a Time in the West in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Explain Movie Friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Once Upon a Time in the West. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will watch this movie. This video is produced by Explain Movie. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this, we'll discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Once Upon a Time in the West, Italian. C'era una volta il West is a 1968 epic spaghetti western film directed by Sergio Leone, who co-wrote it with Sergio Donati, based on a story by Dario Argento, Bernardo Bertolucci, and Leone. It stars Henry Fonda, cast against type as the villain, Charles Bronson as his nemesis, Jason Robards as a bandit, and Claudia Cardinale as a newly widowed homesteader. The widescreen cinematography was by Tonino Deli Colli, and the acclaimed film score was by Ennio Morricone. After directing The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Leone decided to retire from westerns and aimed to produce his film based on the novel The Hoods, which eventually became Once Upon a Time in America. However, Leone accepted an offer from Paramount Pictures, providing Henry Fonda and a budget to produce another western. He recruited Bertolucci and Argento to devise the plot of the film in 1966, researching other western films in the process. After Clint Eastwood turned down an offer to play the movie's protagonist, Bronson was offered the role. During production, Leone recruited Donati to rewrite the script due to concerns over time limitations. The original version by the director was 165 minutes when it was first released on December 21, 1968. This version was shown in European cinemas and was a box office success. For the U.S. release on May 28, 1969, Once Upon a Time in the West was edited down to 140 minutes by Paramount and was a financial flop. The film is the first installment in Leone's Once Upon a Time trilogy, followed by Duck, You Sucker, and Once Upon a Time in America, though the films do not share any characters in common. In 2009, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The film is regarded as one of the greatest westerns of all time and one of the greatest films of all time. Plot: a train arrives at the Old West town of Flagstone, where a man with a harmonica, later dubbed Harmonica, overcomes an ambush by killing 3 men in dusters. Although Harmonica was expecting to meet an outlaw named Frank, he concludes by the dusters the men belong to the outlaw Cheyenne's gang. It is not yet revealed why Harmonica seeks Frank. Meanwhile, Frank and his gang murder Brett McBain and his 3 children as they prepare for a celebration at his ranch called Sweetwater. Shortly thereafter, a former prostitute arrives at Sweetwater and reveals she is Jill McBain, who married McBain a month before in New Orleans. Frank leaves evidence at the murder scene implicating Cheyenne. Jill is shocked at the murders and searches for a motive. Frank is a hired gun for railway tycoon Morton, who directed Frank to intimidate, not murder, McBain. McBain intended to profit by building a watering station on Sweetwater because he knew the railroad from Flagstone would eventually pass through his property. However, if the station was incomplete by the time the railroad reached Sweetwater, the property would revert to the railroad. McBain's murder puts Morton at odds with Frank, who desires the land for himself. Jill's unexpected appearance makes her the owner of Sweetwater as McBain's surviving widow. Harmonica encounters Cheyenne, now a fugitive, who denies his men were sent to ambush him. Harmonica saves Jill from 2 of Frank's men and spies out the railway carriage where Morton, owing to his spinal tuberculosis, is confined on crutches. Harmonica discovers the connection between Frank and Morton, but is seen and captured. Frank is called away and Cheyenne rescues Harmonica. The two collaborate to help Jill save Sweetwater, using stockpiled materials to start building a station. After a threatening sexual encounter with Frank, Jill is forced to auction the land, but Frank's henchmen intimidate the bidders in order to purchase it for Frank at a low price. Harmonica appears with Cheyenne in tow and bids $5,000, which is the price on Cheyenne's head as a wanted fugitive. Frank is unsuccessful in buying Harmonica out and wonders why Harmonica is pursuing him. Morton bribes Frank's own men to kill him, but Harmonica intervenes to save Frank because of his unfinished business with him. Cheyenne escapes custody, and he and his gang engage Frank's remaining men in a gunfight on Morton's train. Except for Cheyenne, who heads to Sweetwater, everyone is killed, including Morton. When Frank sees the aftermath of the fight, he rides to Sweetwater too, where he finds Harmonica waiting. Cheyenne has arrived earlier, but he remains in the ranch house with Jill. Outside, Harmonica and Frank engage in a showdown. Through a flashback, it is revealed that Frank had once shoved a harmonica into the mouth of a boy while he supported his older brother on his shoulders as Frank was hanging him. When the boy collapses, the instrument flies from his mouth. Now Harmonica beats Frank to the draw, and as Frank lies dying, he pushes the harmonica into Frank's mouth. After Harmonica and Cheyenne leave Sweetwater together, Cheyenne collapses and dies from a gut wound he received in the gunfight with Morton. Harmonica puts the body on Cheyenne's horse and rides off as Jill serves water to the railroad workers. Cast: Claudia Cardinale as Jill McBain, Henry Fonda as Frank, Jason Robards as Manuel Cheyenne Gutierrez, Charles Bronson as Harmonica, Gabriella Ferzetti as Mr. Morton, Paulo Stappa as Sam the coachman, Keenan Wynn as the sheriff of Flagstone, Frank Wolf as Brett McBain, Lionel Stander as the barman, Woody Strode as Stoney, first gunman, Jack Elam as Snakey, second gunman. In addition to the credited cast, uncredited actors in the film include Enzo Santaniello, Timmy, Simonetta Santaniello, Maureen, and Stefano Imperato, Patrick, as the McBain children, Al Mulock as the third station gunman Knuckles, Conrado San Martin as Vicino, Marco Zuanelli as Wobbles, and Claudio Mancini as Harmonica's brother. Members of Cheyenne's gang are played by Aldo Sambrell, Lorenzo Robledo, and Bruno Corazzari. Members of Frank's gang are played by Roman Ariz Navarrete, Frank Bragna, Antonio Molino Rojo, and Fabio Testi. Production. Origin. After making his American gunfighter epic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Leone had intended to make no more westerns, believing he had said all he wanted to say. He had come across the novel The Hoods by the pseudonymous Harry Gray, a fictionalized book based on the author's own experiences as a Jewish hood during Prohibition, and planned to adapt it into a film. 17 years later, it would become his final film, Once Upon a Time in America. Leone, though, was offered only westerns by the Hollywood studios. United Artists, which had produced the Dollars trilogy, offered him the opportunity to make a film starring Charlton Heston, Kirk Douglas, and Rock Hudson, but Leone refused. When Paramount offered Leone a generous budget along with access to Henry Fonda, his favorite actor, and one with whom he had wanted to work for virtually all of his career, Leone accepted the offer. Leone commissioned Bernardo Bertolucci and Dario Argento to help him devise a film treatment in late 1966. The men spent much of the following year watching and discussing numerous classic westerns, such as High Noon, The Iron Horse, The Comancheros, and The Searchers at Leone's house, and constructed a story made up almost entirely of references to American westerns. Style and pacing. For Once Upon a Time in the West, Leone changed his approach over his earlier westerns. Whereas the Dollars films were quirky and up-tempo, a celebratory yet tongue-in-cheek parody of the icons of the Wild West, this film is much slower in pace and somber in theme. Leone's distinctive style, which is very different from but very much influenced by Akira Kurosawa's Sanshiro Sugata, 1943, is still present, but has been modified for the beginning of Leone's second trilogy, the so-called Once Upon a Time trilogy. The characters in this film are also beginning to change markedly over their predecessors in the Dollars trilogy. They are not quite as defined, and unusual for Leone characters up to this point. They begin to change, or at least attempt to, over the course of the story. This signals the start of the second phase of Leone's style, which was further developed in Duck, You Sucker, and Once Upon a Time in America. The film features long, slow scenes with very little dialogue and little happening, broken by brief and sudden violence. Leone was far more interested in the rituals preceding violence than in the violence itself. The tone of the film is consistent with the arid semi-desert in which the story unfolds, and imbues it with a feeling of realism that contrasts with the elaborately choreographed gunplay. Leone liked to tell the story of a cinema in Paris where the film ran uninterrupted for 2 years. When he visited this theater, he was surrounded by fans who wanted his autograph, as well as the projectionist, who was less than enthusiastic. Leone claimed the projectionist told him, "I kill you, the same movie over and over again for 2 years, and it's so slow." Locations interiors for the film were shot in Cinecittà Studios, Rome. The opening sequence with the 3 gunmen meeting the train was one of the sequences filmed in Spain. Shooting for scenes at Cattle Corner Station, as the location was called in the story, was scheduled for 4 days and was filmed at the Ghost Railway Station in the municipality of La Calahorra near Guadix in the province of Granada, Spain, as were the scenes of Flagstone. Shooting for the scenes in the middle of the railway were filmed along the Guadix-Hernan Valley railway line. Scenes at the Sweetwater Ranch were filmed in the Tabernas Desert, Spain. The ranch is still located at what is now called Western Leone. The Brick Arch, where Bronson's character flashes back to his youth and the original lynching incident, was built near a small airport 15 miles, 24 kilometers north of Monument Valley in Utah and 2 miles from U.S. Route 163, which links Goulding's Lodge and Mexican Hat. Monument Valley itself is used extensively for the route Jill travels towards her new family in Sweetwater. Casting Henry Fonda did not accept Leone's first offer to play Frank, so Leone flew to New York to convince him, telling him, "Picture this. The camera shows a gunman from the waist down pulling his gun and shooting a running child. The camera tilts up to the gunman's face, and it's Henry Fonda." Fonda also had not seen any of Leone's previous work, including his Dollars trilogy with Clint Eastwood, so Leone arranged a screening of the trilogy for the actor. After the screening and a meeting with Leone, Fonda called his friend Eli Wallach, who had co-starred in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Wallach advised Fonda to do the film, telling him, "You will have the time of your life." When he accepted the role, Fonda came to the set with brown contact lenses and a handlebar mustache. Fonda felt having dark eyes and facial hair would blend well with his character's evil, and also help the audience to accept this new Fonda as the bad guy. But Leone immediately told him to remove the contacts and facial hair, saying he did not want Fonda to look like a cliché villain. Leone said he cast Claudia Cardinale in part because she was an Italian national, and as such, they could get a tax break. Leone wanted the 3 men who ambush Harmonica and are subsequently killed to be played by Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach in a symbolic killing of the Dollars trilogy, which Leone wanted to put behind him. However, though Wallach was willing, Van Cleef was unavailable and Eastwood was not interested in the role. French actor-filmmaker Robert Hossein was set to play a supporting role as a member of Frank's gang, and is listed in the cast by some sources, including the AFI Catalog of Feature Films. However, Hossein stated in a 2015 featurette for his film Cemetery Without Crosses that he did not actually appear in the film. Localization. Following the film's completion, Once Upon a Time in the West was dubbed into several languages, including Italian, French, German, Spanish, and English. The film's dialogue was translated into English by expatriate American actor Mickey Knox. For the English dub, the voices of many of the American cast, including Fonda, Bronson, Robards, Wynn, Wolfe, and Lionel Stander, were used. However, the rest of the cast had to be dubbed by other actors, including Claudia Cardinale, who was dubbed by actress Joyce Gordon, Gabriella Fersetti, who was voiced by Gordon's husband Bernard Grant and Jack Elam. Music. Main article, Once Upon a Time in the West. The music was written by composer Ennio Morricone, Leone's regular collaborator, who wrote the score under Leone's direction before filming began. As in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the haunting music contributes to the film's grandeur, and like the music for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, is considered one of Morricone's greatest compositions. The film features leitmotifs that relate to each of the main characters with their own theme music, as well as to the spirit of the American West. Especially compelling are the wordless vocals by Italian singer Etta Dell'Orso during the theme music for Jill McBain. Leone's desire was to have the music available and played during filming. Leone had Morricone compose the score before shooting started and played the music in the background for the actors on set. Except for about a minute of the judgment motif, before harmonica kills the three outlaws, no soundtrack music is played until the end of the second scene, when Fonda makes his first entry. During the beginning of the film, Leone instead uses a number of natural sounds, for instance, a turning wheel in the wind, sound of a train, grasshoppers, shotguns while hunting, wings of pigeons, etc., in addition to the diegetic sound of the harmonica. European release. The film was a massive hit in France and was easily the most successful film released there in 1969 with 14.8 million admissions, ranking 7th of all time. It sparked a brief fashion trend for duster coats, which took such proportions that Parisian department stores such as Au Printemps had to affix signs on escalators warning patrons to keep their maxis, as they were called, clear from the edges of moving steps to prevent jamming. It was also the most popular film in Germany with admissions of 13 million, ranking 3rd of all time. American release. In the U.S., Paramount edited the film to about 145 minutes for the wide release, but the film underperformed at the box office, earning $2.1 million in North America. These scenes were cut for the American release. The entire scene at Lionel Stander's trading post. Cheyenne Robards was not introduced in the American release until his arrival at the McBain Ranch later in the film. Stander remained in the credits, though he did not appear in this version at all. The scene in which Morton and Frank discuss what to do with Jill at the Navajo Cliffs. Morton's death scene was reduced considerably. Cheyenne's death scene was completely excised. Otherwise, one scene was slightly longer in the U.S. version than in the international film release. Following the opening duel, where all 4 gunmen fire and fall, Charles Bronson's character stands up again, showing that he had only been shot in the arm. This part of the scene had been originally cut by director Sergio Leone for the worldwide theatrical release. It was added again for the U.S. market because the American distributors feared American viewers would not understand the story otherwise, especially since harmonica's arm wound is originally shown for the first time in the scene at the trading post, which was cut for the shorter U.S. version. The English language version was restored to around 165 minutes for a re-release in 1984 and for its video release the following year. Director's cut. In Italy, a 171-minute director's cut features a yellow tint filter, and several scenes were augmented with additional material. This director's cut was available on home video until the early 2000s, and still airs on TV, but more recent home video releases have used the international cut. Home media. After years of public requests, Paramount released a 2-disc special collector's edition of Once Upon a Time in the West on November 18, 2003, with a running time of 165 minutes, 158 minutes in some regions. MB1. This release is the color 2.351 aspect ratio version in anamorphic widescreen, closed captioned, and Dolby. Commentary is also provided by film experts and historians, including John Carpenter, John Milius, Alex Cox, film historian and Leone biographer Sir Christopher Frayling, Dr. Sheldon Hall, and actors Claudia Cardinale and Gabriele Ferzetti, and director Bernardo Bertolucci, a co-writer of the film. The second disc has special features, including 3 recent documentaries on several aspects of the film. An Opera of Violence, The Wages of Sin, Something to Do with Death. The film was released on Blu-ray on May 31, 2011, with a limited edition 4K UHD Blu-ray released as part of the Paramount Presents series on May 14, 2024. A standard issue 4K UHD was released on January 15, 2025. Restored version. A restored 4K version was published by Cineteca di Bologna in 2018 with improved colors and image quality. Reception. Box office. In Italy, the film sold 8,870,732 tickets. In the United States, it grossed $5,321,508, 3.7 million ticket sales. It sold a further 14,873,084 admissions in France and 13,018,414 admissions in Germany, for a total of 40,462,950 tickets sold worldwide. Critical response. Once Upon a Time in the West was reviewed in 1969 in the Chicago Sun-Times by Roger Ebert, who gave it 2.5 stars out of 4. He found the film good fun and a painstaking distillation of Leone's famous style, with intriguing performances by actors cast against their type and a richness of detail projecting a sense of life of the West made possible by Paramount's larger budget for this Leone film. Ebert complained of the film's length and convoluted plot, which he said only becomes clear by the second hour. While viewing Cardinale as a good casting choice, he said she lacked the blood and thunder abandon of her performance in Cartouche 1962, blaming Leone for directing her too passively. In subsequent years, the film developed a greater standing among critics, as well as a cult following. Directors such as Martin Scorsese, George Lucas, Quentin Tarantino, and Vince Gilligan have cited the film as an influence on their work. It has also appeared on prominent all-time critics lists, including Time's 100 Greatest Films of the 20th Century and Empire's 500 Greatest Movies of All Time, where it was the list's highest-ranking Western at number 14. Popular culture scholar Christopher Frayling regarded it as one of the greatest films ever made. On review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 96% approval rating based on 68 reviews with an average score of 9.1/10. The critical consensus reads, a landmark Sergio Leone spaghetti western masterpiece featuring a classic Morricone score. Metacritic gives the film a weighted average score of 82 out of 100 based on reviews from 9 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Accolade. Time named Once Upon a Time in the West as one of the 100 greatest films of all time. Total Film placed Once Upon a Time in the West in their special edition issue of the 100 Greatest Movies. In 2008, Empire held a poll of the 500 greatest movies of all time, taking votes from 10,000 readers, 150 filmmakers, and 50 film critics. Once Upon a Time in the West was voted in at number 14, the highest Western on the list. In 2017, it was then ranked at number 52 on Empire's poll for the 100 greatest movies, the second highest Western on the list. In 2009, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. In 2010, The Guardian ranked it third in its The 25 Best Action and War Films of All Time list, and in 2013, the paper ranked it first in its Top 10 Movie Westerns list. In the 2012 Sight and Sound polls, it was ranked the 78th greatest film ever made in the critics' poll and 44th in the directors' poll. In 2014, Time Out polled several film critics, directors, actors, and stunt actors to list their top action films. Once Upon a Time in the West placed 30th on their list. Year-end lists. The film is recognized by American Film Institute in these lists. Film references. Leone's intent was to take the stock conventions of the American Westerns of John Ford, Howard Hawks, and others, and rework them in an ironic fashion, essentially reversing their intended meaning in their original sources to create a darker connotation. The most obvious example of this is the casting of veteran film good guy Henry Fonda as the villainous Frank, but many other more subtle reversals occur throughout the film. According to film critic and historian Christopher Frayling, the film quotes from as many as 30 classic American Westerns. The major films referenced include The Comancheros, 1961, the names McBain and Sweetwater may come from this film. Contrary to popular belief, the name of the town Sweetwater was not taken from Victor Sjöström's silent epic drama The Wind. Bernardo Bertolucci has stated that he looked at a map of the southwestern United States, found the name of the town in Arizona, and decided to incorporate it into the film. However, both Sweetwater and a character named McBain appeared in the Comancheros, which Leone admired. Johnny Guitar, 1954. Jill and Vienna have similar backstories. Both are former prostitutes who become saloon keepers, and both own land where a train station will be built because of access to water. Also, Harmonica, like Sterling Hayden's title character, is a mysterious gunslinging outsider known by his musical nickname. Some of West's central plot, Western settlers versus the railroad company, may be recycled from Nicholas Ray's film. The Iron Horse, 1924. West may contain several subtle references to this film, including a low-angle shot of a shrieking train rushing towards the screen in the opening scene, and the shot of the train pulling into the Sweetwater station at the end. Shane, 1953. The massacre scene in West features young Timmy McBain out hunting with his father, just as Joey does in this movie. The funeral of the McBains is borrowed almost shot for shot from Shane. The Searchers, 1956. Leone admitted that the rustling bushes, the silencing of insect sounds, and the fluttering grouse that suggests menace is approaching the farmhouse when the McBain family is massacred were all taken from The Searchers. The ending of the film, where Western nomads Harmonica and Cheyenne move on rather than join modern society, also echoes the famous ending of Ford's film. Winchester 73, 1950. The scenes in West at the trading post are claimed to be based on those in Winchester 73, but the resemblance is slight. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962. The dusters, long coats worn by Cheyenne and his gang, and by Frank and his men while impersonating them, resemble those worn by Liberty Valance, Lee Marvin, and his henchmen when they are introduced in this film. In addition, the auction scene in West was intended to recall the election scene in Liberty Valance. The Last Sunset, 1961. The final duel between Frank and Harmonica is shot almost identically to the duel between Kirk Douglas and Rock Hudson in this film. Duel in the Sun, 1946. The character of Morton, the crippled railroad baron in West, was based on the character played by Lionel Barrymore in this film. Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West is a painstaking distillation of the style he made famous in the original 3 Clint Eastwood westerns. There's the same eerie music, the same sweaty, ugly faces, the same rhythm of waiting and violence, the same attention to small details of Western life. There is also, unfortunately, Leone's inability to call it quits. The movie stretches on for nearly 3 hours with intermission and provides 2 false alarms before it finally ends. In between, we're given a plot complex enough for Antonioni, involving killers, land rights, railroads, long-delayed revenge, mistaken identity, love triangles, double crosses, and shootouts. We're well into the second hour of the movie before the plot becomes quite clear. These difficulties notwithstanding, Once Upon a Time in the West is good fun, especially if you like Leone's way of savoring the last morsel of every scene. A final shootout between Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson, for example, takes at least 15 minutes. They walk, they wait, they circle each other, they stare at each other, they squint, they spit, they take off their jackets, they wince. Just when they finally seem prepared to shoot after all, Leone uses a flashback. But why hurry a good shootout? Leone's first 2 spaghetti westerns, A Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, were made with small budgets. His third, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, was made with a few dollars more. But this one was bankrolled by Paramount, and looks like it. There's a wealth of detail, a lot of extras, elaborate sets. There's a sense of the life of the West going on all around the action, and that sense is impossible to obtain on small budgets. Leone produces some interesting performances by casting against type. Henry Fonda is the bad guy for once in his career. Charles Bronson is impressively inscrutable as the mysterious good guy, and Jason Robards is a tough guy, believe it or not. Claudia Cardinale was a good choice for the woman, but Leone directs her too passively. In Cartouche, she demonstrated a blood and thunder abandon that's lacking here. A Marxist revisionist Western that feels like a comedy half the time and a revenger's tragedy in operatic guise for the other half. On paper, at least, this looks like the very last Western worthy of admission to the pantheon of the genre's masterworks. But there it is, routinely counted among the greatest Westerns ever made, and rightly so. Leone, together with Dario Argento and Bernardo Bertolucci, initially conceived a Western almost entirely made up of references to the classics of the genre. The Iron Horse, The Searchers, Shane and High Noon are just some of the movies plundered and revered in the final 3-hour epic. The film has an unabashedly left-wing tilt in its depiction of capitalism's ruthless conquest of the West, as it crushes or kills every obstacle in its path. If that all sounds a little dry to you, then Leone knew enough to cast his movie with icons of the genre, including rising star Charles Bronson in the no-name lead role and Jason Robards as comic relief. His most daring gambit, however, was to persuade Henry Fonda to play his monstrous killer, railroad enforcer Frank. Legend has it Fonda, preparing for his first evil role, showed up on set wearing a bandito mustache and half rolling his eyes. "No," said Leone, "I want Henry Fonda, clean-shaven, and then we'll make him bad." There's no doubting Frank's evil core when he guns down a child moments after appearing on screen. And opera? Well, consider that Leone's schoolmate Ennio Morricone wrote individual musical signatures for each of the 4 main characters, the fourth being Claudia Cardinale's Jill McBain, who fares about as well as you'd expect a woman in a macho Italian Western, and the music is almost as busy channeling our attention as anything in the script. The climactic gunfight with its 3 minutes of intro music and flashbacks, including the big revelation, and 2 seconds of gunplay achieves an almost orgasmic intensity through Morricone's soaring, slashing score. With every set piece artificially elongated for comedy or suspense, and every other scene almost wordless, this is a movie that takes its time. But by the final credits, you know you're in the presence of imperishable greatness. The BFI last re-released Sergio Leone's 1968 revenge Western 10 years ago in a newly complete cut of almost 2 3/4 hours. Its reappearance now is in honor of a new restoration. After watching it again, however, I have to admit to feelings of restlessness. The movie is as mysterious and mesmeric as ever, with its grandiloquent panoramas and mad, melodramatic close-ups on sweaty and malevolent faces. Everywhere, death and the fear of death are present under the burning sun. The opening pre-credit sequence, with its squeaky windwheel in the wilderness, is still great, and this revival may redouble the film's claim to metaphysical masterpiece status, something to be compared to Antonioni. But there is also something opaque in its sprawling and often baffling tale of unscrupulous gunslinger Frank, Henry Fonda, escaped felon Cheyenne, Jason Robards, an impassive tough guy nicknamed Harmonica, Charles Bronson, and their bloody battle for a farmstead owned by a beautiful widow and former New Orleans prostitute, Claudia Cardinale. The plot is not fully explained until the 90-minute mark, and Harmonica's motivation isn't disclosed until almost the very end. Narrative issues also arise when Cheyenne appears to be packed off to prison, but then reappears, having evidently escaped in what may or may not be lost footage. Perhaps the clearer and crisper this film appears, and the more its reputation grows, the more unsettling its indulgences and ellipses appear to be. Well, never mind. It's still a landmark. Sergio Leone's Westerns radiate pure style. All other elements, including narrative, remain residuary byproducts of that style. Informed by the Italian director's obsession with aesthetics, his extravagant Westerns defy the genre's conventions through their gritty descriptions and unromantic backdrops, his desire to form a critical alternative to the idealized Westerns that came before. Leone's most distinctively revisionist material, his Man with No Name trilogy, contains stories and mannerisms that rebel against standard Hollywood models instituted by filmmakers like John Ford. And yet, however uncharacteristic for his own work, Leone implements the scenario and themes of a typical Western with his 1968 film Once Upon a Time in the West. In presenting a standard story against his radical style, Leone calls attention to his place behind the camera, underscoring how his approach to filmmaking is determined by technique over substance. The legacy of Sergio Leone subsists in his connection to Italian or spaghetti westerns, a movement that had been explored before Leone had arrived with a fistful of dollars and lasted long after. This reinterpretation of the Western genre, the only genre born and bred in the United States, was initially received with hesitation by U.S. audiences dedicated to John Ford's ideal of the American West. Shot in European deserts such as Almeria and completed with the help of investors from across Europe, the Italian Western became known for its low-budget, extreme violence, coarse appearance, and fatalistic storytelling. Spanish and Italian actors populated the casts, playing American and Mexican roles. The filmmakers, including Michael Carreras, director to what is attributed as the first spaghetti western, Tierra Brutal, The Savage Guns, 1961, aspired for distinctive methods and, like Leone, sought to imprint their own stylistic mark onto the already defined mores of the genre. But after seeing a spaghetti western by Sergio Leone, one never has to see another. His anti-classical approach, preceded by revisionist westerns such as John Ford's The Searchers and Anthony Mann's Man of the West, reinvented the genre in new, playful terminology and cemented future impressions of his Italian subgenre. As his director father Vincenzo helped forge the Italian silent film, and his mother Edvi Valcarenghi was an actress, Leone was virtually born into the film industry. He left law school in his late teens and apprenticed behind several of Hollywood's contemporary greats. For over a decade, beginning in 1947, he served under Raoul Walsh, Colorado Territory, Fred Zinnemann, High Noon, and William Wyler, The Big Country, whose westerns would later influence his own work. During the 1950s, he became an assistant director of sword and sandal epics shot out of Cinecittà Studios in Rome, where he worked on Hollywood productions of Quo Vadis and Ben-Hur. Over time, Leone gained enough high regard, so when Mario Bonnard took ill while shooting The Last Days of Pompeii, the studio entrusted him to step in and finish the production. Another historical epic, The Colossus of Rhodes from 1961, became Leone's first solo directorial effort, although he would never again return to the sword and scandal genre. Born from a childhood fascination with the American West, Leone's colonization of the spaghetti western began with A Fistful of Dollars in 1964, based directly upon Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, released 3 years earlier. With success and attention on Leone's first western, Yojimbo's producers filed a successful lawsuit that accurately claimed Leone based his film on Kurosawa's without issuing credit. He was forced to pay a hefty compensation. Though Leone lifts his story structure from Kurosawa, who loosely based Yojimbo on Dashiell Hammett's novel Red Harvest, the director's unique visual style is undeniable. With its minimalist production and Ennio Morricone's animated score, the film, despite its problematic story origins, confirms Leone's voice is a true original in technique alone. His name and popularity would continue to grow with his next two films, For a Few Dollars More in 1965 and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly the following year, completing what he called his Man with No Name trilogy. Both titles expanded Leone's method, maturing the story, scale, and runtime in each case to outline his style. Leone's Man with No Name trilogy contains all the indications of his distinctive approach to westerns, but it also offers narrative themes against which his atypical masterpiece, Once Upon a Time in the West, can be differentiated. Understanding a Sergio Leone western is tantamount to understanding those of John Ford, the founding father of the genre in Hollywood, in that Ford's pictures provide Leone with a cast to reshape. Ford's idealistic plots romanticize the Western frontier as the defining climax of American identity, but Leone's westerns are not typically about manifest destiny. He explored the frontier in all its cruelty, not from a historically accurate perspective, but from a realistic view of the West that brought the raw details of the frontier into focus with the finesse of a comic book. His characters were not cowboys looking to settle the West or hard-boiled sheriffs protecting the dusty streets of a boomtown, just bandits and bounty hunters and drifters looking to carve themselves up some petty existence. Designations of good and evil are left ambiguous. He acknowledged that lawmen were often as corrupt as the criminals they pursued, and that the frontier was a wild wasteland of lawlessness. Leone's ongoing protagonist in the Man with No Name trilogy, for example, was the nameless gun-for-hire played by Clint Eastwood, a narcissistic character devoid of scruples and seemingly driven by the appeal of money alone. In the face of Ford's traditionalism, so jealously maintained by Hollywood filmmakers, Leone's westerns are radical, anti-ideological, and critical of the genre's traditional stereotypes. Leone described his films as fairy tales for grown-ups, whereas early Ford pictures might be considered kid stuff in comparison. Leone attempted realism in his way by counteracting Ford's conventional ideologies, depicting the unflinching violence of the American West without reserve. In an effort to dispel the Ford model, Leone intentionally overcompensates with his style, exaggerating with a sense of theatricality that lends his pictures grandness, despite their storylines being based around scoundrels on barren, unforgiving land. Though his films center on the lowest forms of life scraping by in the American West, through his brooding attention to detail, deliberately slow and involving pace, and Morricone's aggrandizing music, Leone supplies his pictures with an uncommon operatic importance so astonishingly ironic, given the ragged nature of his scenarios. Once Upon a Time in the West stands apart from Leone's other westerns by affixing the director's style onto a Fordian saga of manifest destiny, the details of which are derived from an extended homage to a number of classic westerns. He opens his picture with a showdown taken straight from Zinnemann's High Noon. Three hoods wait at a train station for a man they were hired to kill, a mysterious drifter played by Charles Bronson, dubbed harmonica for the way he eerily hums on the instrument looped around his neck. When their target arrives, they engage a 3-against-1 showdown from which only harmonica walks away. In a plan to say goodbye to his title characters from the good, the bad, and the ugly, Leone wanted his established trio together at the train station in the opening sequence. The bad, Lee Van Cleef, and the ugly, Eli Wallach, agreed to reprise their roles in the proposed cameo. But Leone and Eastwood had a heavily publicized falling out that prevented the good from appearing and the idea from coming to fruition. Nevertheless, Leone hired rugged-faced Western icons Woody Strode, Jack Elam, and Al Mulock fill the roles of the three hired guns. The scene in its originally conceived format would have pronounced the auteuristic end of Leone's stylistic exploration with the Man with No Name films in self-referential vocabulary, and further establish Once Upon a Time in the West as a singular declaration of his cohesive, now fully established style. Regardless of his casting choice falling through, Leone's message is clear. The showdown is followed by the slaughter of the McBain family at Sweetwater Farm. Wealthy landowner Brett McBain, his elder son, daughter, and younger son Timmy are gunned down by ruthless villain-cum-industrialist Frank, Henry Fonda, to free up the valuable McBain property for investment, which in time will support the new railroad pushing toward the Pacific. Unbeknownst to Frank and his employer, tuberculosis-ridden businessman Morton, Gabrielle Ferzetti, McBain was secretly married to an ex-New Orleans prostitute named Jill, Claudia Cardinale, who inherits the McBain land, and also the potential fortune to be had by its connection to the emergent railroad. Arriving that day, Jill makes her way to Sweetwater. Her coach stops at an outpost for rest, and she meets the charismatic, freshly escaped outlaw Cheyenne, Jason Robards, and the silent drifter Harmonica, both of whom boast uncertain intentions. She later arrives at the farm to find the funeral in progress for McBain and his children. She is now a widow. The local law assumes Cheyenne murdered the McBain family, though he takes care to clear his name with Jill, as does Harmonica. Both men are impressed by her resolve. The culprit, they all agree, is Frank. Motivated by the example of Morton, Frank's hunger to become a powerful businessman is hindered by his criminal instincts, his unrelenting connection to the lawless West, a place slowly deteriorating as the railroad finally reaches its long-sought frontier. Dressed in black attire as a classicized Western villain should be, Frank's methods rest in violence and intimidation. These methods have made their mark on Harmonica, whose mysterious past alludes to a deadly encounter with Frank long ago. Throughout the film, as Frank encounters Harmonica, he asks the stranger his name. Harmonica replies by listing names of the men Frank has killed. This puzzling response is what keeps Frank from killing Harmonica on the spot, as he desperately wants to know this man's identity. Meanwhile, Frank forces himself on Jill to scare her away from the land, and during an auction, she sells Sweetwater to the highest bidder, Harmonica, who can afford the price after turning in Cheyenne for a bounty, a riskless move as the authorities never keep Cheyenne captive for long. Having kept the land with Jill, Harmonica and Cheyenne arrange for a station and small town to be built on Sweetwater to greet the railroad, while they dispose of Frank's men to assure she can live in peace. Frank, no longer concerned about his dreams of attaining Morton's level of power, arrives to settle things with Harmonica, knowing the only way he will discover the drifter's identity is by bringing him to the point of death. They draw weapons, and Frank goes down. He falls to his knees mere moments from death. Harmonica approaches, tearing the instrument from around his neck and placed it in Frank's mouth. At that instant, Frank recalls killing a man long ago and wedging a harmonica into the mouth of the man's young brother, who was forced not only to witness the murder but take part in it. Harmonica is that boy, and though his lifelong quest to avenge his brother is finally achieved, he cannot retire with Jill, who has grown to love him. He and Cheyenne are members of an ancient race of men, Western men destined to die out as the railroad modernizes their untamed habitat. In the last scenes, Cheyenne confesses he was shot while taking down Frank's gang. He dies, and Harmonica carries his body on horseback into the distance. As he does, the train rolls into Sweetwater, ushering a new era and closing another. Through his narrative, Leone embraces typified Fordian ideals with his own style to address a less hopeful, more realistic, anti-romantic view of the West, that America found her bearings through the violent journey of often criminal frontiersmen. With the ultimate conquest of the West, pre-Americans such as Cheyenne soon found that their newly civilized frontier no longer had a place for them. But in romantic Ford pictures, like My Darling Clementine or Stagecoach, heroes tame the Wild West and then either advance further westward or settle down to a cultured living. However, Leone supports other classic Western structures, such as opening his film with a reference to High Noon. The McBain farmhouse rests on a desolate plot of land, not unlike the farmhouse in The Searchers. The tough-minded female protagonist Jill recalls Joan Crawford in Nicholas Ray's Johnny Guitar. Leone's inclusion of Ford's signature locale at Monument Valley, which was otherwise conspicuously absent from his earlier films, lends the picture an intended Fordian splendor that the director had previously avoided. But in Leone's hands, the Monument Valley of John Ford feels like one of the brutal frontier landscapes from Leone's earlier films, so void of natural redeeming beauty. Ford utilized the rock spires as heavenly gates, ushering weary travelers to the promised land. Leone uses these familiar geological devices to keep classic Western tropes in his audience's unconscious. As a result, in Once Upon a Time in the West, Leone's style is defined through his embellishments, a presence of playful excess on tradition. Place Once Upon a Time in the West alongside the archetypal Ford classic My Darling Clementine, and the contrasts emerge. Both films star Henry Fonda, concerned taming the wild frontier, and consider the role of one woman character vital to the West becoming a place of progress. Leone had originally sought Fonda to play Clint Eastwood's role in the Man with No Name trilogy, but the actor turned down the part. Only after seeing the trilogy, and after much pestering from Leone, did Fonda finally accept the role as Frank. By casting Fonda, Ford's penultimate leading man after John Wayne, he attacks the audience with their own preconceived notions about Fonda and Westerns. Audiences accustomed to the good-mannered Fonda of My Darling Clementine and Drums Along the Mohawk find themselves confronted by a despicable villain in Frank, whose first appearance ends when he shoots a child while calmly bending a sadistic smile. The ex-prostitute Jill, the antithesis of Kathy Downs' hopeful schoolmarm of Clementine Carter, who promises to bring education and manners to the West, more resembles Doc Holliday's saloon girl, Chihuahua. Claudia Cardinale plays Leone's only female protagonist in a genre whose women are usually defined through their vulnerable sexuality. Through rape or the threat of rape, Western women rarely extend beyond a motivational device for a male protagonist. Indeed, even Cardinale's Jill becomes subject to an unpleasant sexual encounter with Frank, but the incident could scarcely be described as a rape with all the violent connotations of the word. Frank simply appears on top of her, and Jill hardly struggles. Frank is almost shocked that Jill helps him undress her while she merely wants to get it over it with. She gives in because she resolves that enduring the discomfort of Frank's advance allows her a future, whereas putting up a fight may incite Frank to put a bullet in her head. The incident is just another filthy memory for her. Still, the scene plays with undeniable unease, and its message can be easily misinterpreted, especially given the general masculinity behind all Leone films. Much like the title character from My Darling Clementine, Jill serves as a symbol for the film itself. Pure in a stylistic and thematic sense, yet rugged in its characters and the reality of the setting, Jill is the ironic ex-prostitute who brings purifying water to the West through her newly formed town, which McBain named Sweetwater no less. Symbolically aligned with the purity of water, yet stricken by the human faults that conquered the Western landscape, Jill is the West, an elemental spring who represents a saving grace for many of the film's characters. As the owner of Sweetwater and the precious water on that land, she stands as an emblem of manifest destiny, while water itself is a primary theme throughout the film. It provides a holy grail of sorts, where the cup itself is replaced by land or wells. Key events occur around or because of water. Shootouts transpire around wells on the McBain farm. Characters meet when one enters an outpost for a drink of water. Woody Strode's hired gun Stoney waits for dripping water on his hat to collect, then drinks it down before the opening shootout. Morton dreams of the blue Pacific and obsesses over a painting of violent ocean water, and when he dies he is near a stream, the phantom sounds of the ocean ringing in his ears. Along with his elemental theme, Leone's characters are each icons acting out iconographic Western roles. Though Leone does humanize them through his melodrama, the film is more about symbols than characters, and his iconography is built through style. The deliberate and methodical pace, what some would call slow but others would call involving, builds to moments modulated into high drama by the score. Ennio Morricone's sprawling music reaches full orchestral reverberation at crucial dramatic turns, a glorious theme first heard when Timmy McBain comes upon his slain family, or later during the showdown between Frank and Harmonica. At other times, Morricone quietly defines a character with a single instrument, such as Harmonica's eerily winding tune or Cheyenne's playful guitar strum. The lack of sound is also essential. Ambient noise such as drips and creaks give way to thrilling, suspenseful silence. Music or not, Leone dwells on the monstrous, gargoyle-like faces of his characters. They fill blank landscapes, empty stages of unimpressive design filled with dust and sagebrush and a conspicuous lack of life. He holds dramatically composed shot far beyond where another director would cut to fully submerge his audience in the moment. Self-aware in every respect, from his dynamic framing to the prolonged showdowns, Leone's meticulous style may distance some viewers from making an emotional connection to his work, but striking dramatic chords is hardly his principal intention. Leone is a director of pure style, as opposed to emotional meaning, and Once Upon a Time in the West has little purpose beyond further defining his mannerist style against the methods of those classicists before him. He celebrates the films of John Ford by merging setting and the theme of manifest destiny with his own flourishes, and in turn creates an incomparable opera western whose power resides in the awe he creates around the traditions carved down before him. The result could scarcely be described as a spaghetti western, given the film's devotion to American filmmakers and their conventions, and the notable lack of hopelessness within the story. Rather, this postmodern epic, with all its recycling and references, provides a stage where a grand anastrophe on a classic tale is committed with no end of expressionist wonder. Cast: Claudia Cardinale as Jill McBain, Henry Fonda as Frank Jason Robards as Manuel Chen Gutierrez, Charles Bronson, Sharmonica Gabrielle Facchetti as Miss Morton, Paulo Stopper as Sam the Coachman, Keenan Winnis, the Sheriff of Flagstone, Frank Wolf as Brett Bain, Lionel Standeris, the Barman, Woody Strode as Stoney First Gunman, Jackie Lambus, Snaky Second Gunman. In addition to the credited cast and credited actors in the film include Enzo Soniello as Timmy Simonetta Soniello and Stefano Imperato as Patrick as McBain children, Al Muocas the Third Station, Gunman Knuckles Conrad San Martin as Vino Marcos Winelli as Wobbles, and Claudio Mancini as Sharmonica's brother, members of Cheyenne's gang, are replayed by Aldo Samra, Lorenzo Roblu, and Bruno Corizari. Members of Frank's gang replayed by Roman Arno, Veretta Frank Brana, Antonio Molino Rojo, and Fabio Testi production. After making his American gunfighter epic, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Leone had intended to make no more Western, believing he had said all he wanted to say. He had come across the novel The Hoods by the pseudonymous Harry Gray, a fictionalized book based on the author's own experiences as a Jewish hood during Prohibition, and planned to adapt it into a film 17 years later. It would become his final film. Once Upon a Time in America, Leone, though, was offered only Westerns by the Hollywood studios. United Artists, which had produced the Dollars trilogy, offered him the opportunity to make a film starring Charlton H.K. Kirk Douglas and Rock Hudson, but Leone refused. When Paramount offered Leone a generous budget along with access to Henry's favorite actor, and one with whom he had wanted to work for virtually all of his career, Leone accepted the offer. Leone commissioned Bernardo Batoy and Dario Argento to help him devise a film treatment in late 1966. Thiemann spent much of the following year watching and discussing numerous classic westerns, such as High Noon, The Iron Horse, The Comanche, and The Searchers at Leone's house, and constructed a story made up almost entirely of references to American westerns, beginning with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which originally ran for 3 hours. Leone's films had usually been cut quite considerably for box office release. Leone was very conscious of the length of Once Upon a Time in the West during filming, and subsequently commissioned Sergio Donati, who had worked on several of Leone's other films, to help him refine the screenplay, largely to curb the length of the film toward the end of production style and pacing for Once Upon a Time in the West. Leone changed his approach over his earlier westerns. Whereas the Dollars films were quirky and up-tempo as celebratory, yet tongue-in-cheek parody of the icons of the Wild West, this film is much slower in pace and somber. Leone's distinctive style, which is very different from but very much influenced by Akira Kurosawa's Senshuriro Sagata 1943, is still present, but has been modified for the beginning of Leone's second trilogy, the so-called Once Upon a Time trilogy. The characters in this film are also beginning to change markedly over their predecessors in the Dollars trilogy. They are not quite as defined and unusual for Leone characters up to this point. They begin to change, or at least attempt to, over the course of the story. This signals the start of the second phase of Leone's style, which was further developed in Duck You Sucker and Once Upon a Time in America. The film features long, slow scenes with very little dialogue and little happening, broken by brief and sudden violence. Leone was far more interested in the rituals preceding violence than in the violence itself. The tone of the film is consistent with the arid semi-desert in which the story unfolds in Imbusset, with a feeling of realism that contrasts with the elaborately choreographed gunplay. Leone liked to tell the story of a cinema in Paris where the film ran uninterrupted for 2 years. When he visited this theater, he was surrounded by fans who wanted his autograph, as well as the projectionist, who was less than enthusiastic. Leone claimed the projectionist told him, "I kill you, the same movie over and over again for 2 years, and it's so slow." Locations: Monument Valley, Utah. Interiors for the film were shot in Sonita Studios, Rome. The opening sequence with the 3 gunmen meeting the train was one of these sequences filmed in Spain. Shooting for scenes at Cattle Corner Station, as the location was called in the story, was scheduled for 4 days and was filmed at the Ghost Railway Station in the municipality of La Calahorra, near Guadix in the province of Granada, Spain, as were the scenes of flagstone shooting for the scenes in the middle of the railway were filmed along the Guadix-Hernandilla railway line. Scenes at the Sweetwater Ranch were filmed in the Tabernas Desert, Spain. The ranch is still located at what is now called Wested. Arnley owned the brick arch where Bronson's character flashes back to his youth, and the originally inching incident was built near a small airport 15 miles, 24 kilometers north of Monument Valley in Utah, and 2 miles from US 163, which links Gouling's Lodge and Mexican Hat. Monument Valley itself is used extensively for the route Jill travels towards her new family in Sweetwater. Music. The music was written by composer Ennio Morricone, Leone's regular collaborator, who wrote the score under Leone's direction before filming began. As in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the haunting music contributes to the film's grandeur, and like the music for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, is considered one of Morricone's greatest compositions. The film features leitmotifs that relate to each of the main characters with their own theme of music, as well as to the spirit of the American West. Especially compelling are the wordless vocals by Italian singer Ed Delso. During the theme of music for Jill McBain, Leone's desire was to have the music available and played during filming. Leone had Morricone compose the score before shooting started and played the music in the background for the actors on set, except for about a minute of the Judgment motif. Before harmonica kills the three outlaws, no soundtrack music is played until the end of the second scene, when Fonda makes his first entry. During the beginning of the film, Leone instead uses a number of natural sounds. For instance, a turning wheel in the wind sound of a train grasshopper shotguns while hunting wings of pigeons at set. In addition to the diegetic sound of the harmonica release, a black and white photo of Robards with an untamed beard. Jason Robards, one of the principal actors in the film European release. The film was a massive hit in France and was easily the most successful film released there in 1969, with 14.8 million admissions, ranking 7th of all time. It sparked a brief fashion trend for duster coats, which took such proportions that Parisian department stores such as A.U. Prince had to affix signs on escalators warning patrons to keep their maxes, as they were called, clear from the edges of moving steps to prevent jamming. It was also the most popular film in Germany, with admissions of 13 million, ranking 3rd of all time. American release in the U.S., Paramount had ided the film to about 145 minutes for the wider release, but the film underperformed at the box office, earning $2.1 million in North America. These scenes were cut for the American release. The entire scene at Lionel's trading post, Chen Robards, was not introduced in the American release until his arrival at the McBain Ranch. Later in the film, Stander remained in the credits, though he did not appear in this version at all. The scene in which Morton and Frank discuss what to do with Jill at the Navajo Cliffs, Morton's death scene, was reduced considerably. Chen's death scene was completely excised. Otherwise, one scene was slightly longer in the U.S. version than in the international film release. Following the opening duel, where all four gunmen fire and fall, Charles Bronson's character stands up again, showing that he had only been shot in the arm. This part of the scene had been originally cut by director Sergio Leone for the worldwide theatrical release. It was added again for the U.S. market because the American distributors feared American viewers would not understand the story. Otherwise, especially since harmonica's arm wound, is originally shown for the first time in the scene at the trading post, which was cut for the shorter U.S. version. The English language version was restored to around 165 minutes for our release in 1984 and for its video release the following year. Once Upon a Time in the West movie review. Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West is a painstaking distillation of the style he made famous in the original three, Clint Eastwood rhythm of waiting and violence, the same attention to small details of Western life. There is also, unfortunately, Leone's inability to call it quits. The movie stretches on for nearly 3 hours with intermission and provides 2 false alarms before it finally ends. In between, we're given a plot complex enough for Antoni involving killers, land rights, railroads, long-delayed revenge, mistaken identity, love triangles, double crosses, and shootouts. We're well into the second hour of the movie before the plot becomes quite clear. These difficulties notwithstanding, Once Upon a Time in the West is good fun, especially if you like Leone's way of savoring the last morsel of every scene. A final shootout between Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson, for example, takes it L. East 15 minutes, they walk, they wait, they circle each other, they stare at each other, they squint. They spit, they take off their jackets, they just when they finally seem prepared to shoot. After all, Leone's is a flashback, but why hurry? A good shootout. Lon's first 2 spaghetti westerns, sapphiest full of dollars for a few dollars more, were made with small budgets. His third, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, was made with a few dollars more, but this one was bankrolled by Paramount. Looks like it. There's a wealth of detail, a lot of extra elaborate sets. There's a sense of the life of the West going on all around the action, and that sense is impossible to obtain on small budgets. Leone produces some interesting performances by casting against type Henry Fonda as the bad guy for once in his career. Charles Bronson is impressively inscrutable as the mysterious good guy, and Jason Robards is a tough guy, believe it or not. Claudia Cardinale was a good choice for the woman, but Leone directs her too passively in Cartouche, demonstrated a blood and thunder abandon that's lacking her. This movie is notable for several reasons. I suppose the most obvious is its length. It is something of a drawn-out experience, which you could argue befits the grandness of the director's vision. It is the quintessential Western drenched in spaghetti sauce and pumped up on steroids. Further, any movie that starts with three men, one of whom is played by Woody Strode, for Pete's sake waiting to ambush a guy at a deserted train station, only to have the tables turned on them by a harmonica-playing gunslinger. Well, that's not quite, but almost like having Alice star Janet Leigh knifed to death in the shower less than halfway through a film. Although director Sergio Leone had initially thought to stop making westerns with the intention of producing a film based on the Hoods, which ended up becoming Once Upon a Time in America, he accepted an offer from Paramount to make this film. Unlike Leone's previous spaghetti westerns, Clint Eastwood turned down the protagonist's role, which instead was played harmonica in hand by Charles Bronson, which brings me to another unique aspect of this film. Not only as Eastwood Maa, but Bronson's protagonist, known only as harmonica, has an uneasy summer partnership with outlaw Chen, played with the perfect combination of insouciance and menace by Jason Robards. Not that the pairing of unlikely allies is new in Leon's world. We've seen that before and for a few dollars more in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But there's something about the actors' chemistry and the harmonica that makes this relationship feel different, somehow more exciting and dangerous. It doesn't hurt any that the actors are top-notch. As for the plot, let's put it this way. Things kick off when Jill McBain, a retired prostitute with the biggest heart in the West, arrives in town just in time to find her husband and his children butchered at their home in the middle of Bay. Nowhere murdered by a thug named Frank. The nastiest part I've ever seen Henry Fonda play. You see, Frank wants to force the widow McBain to sell the property to him. The dismal outpost which had made McBain a laughingstock in town must have some value. It's up to Mrs. McBain to figure out what's up. Don't look for the answer here. It's much more fun learning as you watch the story unfold. Oh, and Frank is associated, let us say, with a crippled, handicapped, disabled, health-compromised railroad tycoon named Morton. And Frank is so nasty by comparison, one almost feels sorry for this particular bad guy. Is it any surprise that the three main male characters, harmonica, Chen and Frank, eventually end up in a shootout? I won't spoil the ending, but it is both poignant and deeply satisfying. The men give such powerhouse performances that it nearly threatens to overshadow Claudia Cardinale as the newlywed Mrs. McBain. I'm lying. Cardinale has a steely resolve and likability that make her a winner no matter what the consequences. She holds her own amid three heavyweight male actors with grit to spare, balanced with a touching vulnerability, but she's no pushover. Mrs. McBain isn't going down without a fight. As always, Leone uses location to maximum advantage. The camera moves through the wide-open spaces fluidly and with dynamic grace. Unlike Leon's previous spaghetti westerns, the pacing is snail-like slow, with long scenes and shots featuring little dialogue and not much happening. Not much physical action, I should say, but those long, slow scenes are punctuated with intense moments of violence and conflict that may or may not make up for the crawling, languid pace between them. For a movie Leone didn't plan to make, it comes across rather grandly, almost in the manner of an overwritten love letter to the Western genre. Other information about this film: the BFI last re-released Sergio Leone's 1968 revenge western 10 years ago in a newly complete cut of almost 2 3/4 hours. Its reappearance now is in honor of a new restoration. After watching it again, however, I have to admit to feelings of restlessness. The movie is as mysterious and mesmeric as ever, with its grandiloquent panoramas and mad melodramatic close-ups on sweaty and malevolent faces. Everywhere death and the fear of death are present under the burning sun. The opening pre-Reddit sequence with its squeaky wind wheel in the wilderness is still great, and this revival may redouble the film's claim to metaphysical masterpiece status, something to be compared to Antonione, but there is also something opaque in its sprawling and often baffling tale of unscrupulous gunslinger Frank Henry Fondander, escaped felon Cheen Jason, Robards, an impassive tough guy nicknamed Harmonica Charles Bronson, and their bloody battle for a farmstead owned by a beautiful widow and former New Orleans prostitute Claudia Cardinale. The plot is not fully explained until the 90-minute mark, and harmonica's motivation isn't disclosed until almost the very end. Narrative issues also arise when Chen appears to be packed off to prison, but then reappears having evidently escaped in what may or may not be lost footage. Perhaps the clearer and crisper this film appears, and the more its reputation grows, the more unsettling its indulgences and ellipses appear to be. Well, never mind, it's still a landmark. Once Upon a Time in the West opens with a sequence of about 14 minutes or a touch under that functions very much like a short film prequel to the movie proper, and it is as such the best film of director Sergio Leone's career. I would very much like to call it the best moment of 1960s Italian cinema, and only the best scenes in 8.5 prevent me from making such a claim reflexively. It is certainly one of the all-time great openings to a movie setting. The tone for all that follows it, although frankly that's almost incidental to how good it is, possibly been known to watch just that single bit of the movie and stop feeling quite well sated by having done so. On the flip side, whenever I do go ahead and watch the rest of the film, which isn't terribly often like a lot of Italian genre films, it exists in a confusing array of possible running times, though all of them are pretty damn long. I invariably feel that the rest of the movie, which is by itself one of the greatest westerns ever filmed, and in my private list of the best films in cinema, history is a disappointment for not living up to its opening. That's how good the opening is. It makes a masterpiece. Look W in comparison. Having by now all but announced my intention to marry the opening sequence, I will get around to explaining what it is. For the uninitiated, there is a train station out in the middle of some god-forsaken patch of desert in Arizona. Three men, Woody Strode, Al Mew, and Western fixture Jack Elam, arrive, scare the hell out of the less station agent manning the ticket booth, and set up to wait and wait. One of them amuses himself by watching a fly. One stands underneath a steady drip and listens to the sound it makes on his hat. For 10 minutes this goes on, and it is one of the most unbearably tense moments in all the annals of cinema. It is the peak of Leone's aesthetic of microscopic close-ups, the men's craggy, sweaty faces that exude all the heat and dust of the Southwest filling the anamorphic technoscope frame, the washed-out colors of the stock typical of Italian westerns, sucking all the life out of the sky and sand, the pointed editing from one insert shot to another, creating a sense of what exists while slicing physical space into the smallest constituent pieces. And, above all, the sound, or rather the absence of sound, a suffocating silence that exaggerates the thud of boots on boards, the plonk of water, and the ancient squeak of a windmill outside the station grinding painfully around there. Is an overwhelming emptiness to all of this. All the niceties of movie-making stripped away and leaving just the bones of a scene stretched out as far as Leone dares. It is a sequence that states with unmixed clarity that bad things are coming when that train arrives, and after eventually the train pulls in, a shrieking metal violation of the intense quiet of the preceding 10 minutes, and it disses nobody, at least nobody the three men were waiting for. They are just about to leave in confusion when the harmonica plays a short jog of notes that barely deserve the name tune. It is a motif that we'll hear a hell of a lot over the movie, and it is for Ennio Morricone, as the opening sequence is for Sergio Leone, the most brutally spare version of his style that still manages to make sense. Artistically, it is a hair-raising whine that communicates unnervingly well for such a slight thing, the sound of dying slowly in the hot sun. It is being played by a man, Charles Bronson, whose granite face makes Eastwood's Man with No Name look like Jim Carrey. He'll at one point pick up the nickname harmonica, and that's as convenient to handle as any dismem. He quickly disposes of the three men waiting to kill him and walks on his way. It's a cinematic set. That's what it is, a precise and perfectly balanced mixture of sound and color, texture and editing actors' faces, and merciless actions, all going to create a feeling of the most exquisite forwarding. There aren't a dozen moments in all the movies I've ever seen, and none at all of similar duration that are so flawlessly executed from start to finish in every of the disciplines that collectively go by the name filmmaking. I have gone so far as to use it as a shib to love cinema as a craft, as opposed to its merits as a storytelling medium, is necessarily to love the opening sequence of Once Upon a Time in the West. Nowadays, I'm not so dogmatic, but I'd still go as far as to say that anybody who doesn't adore the sequence body and soul appreciates cinema in some completely different way than I. And through no fault of its own, the movie never lives up to this breathtaking opening. Even the very next scene would be in any other context. A real corker, a homesteader, Brett McBain, Frank Wolf, busily fusses around his ranch in the middle of a God-forsaken dust patch, making ready for the impending arrival of his new wife. He is interrupted by the arrival of a gang of bandits who ruthlessly gun him down along with his 3 young children. And to punctuate it all, the man who kills the youngest is introduced in a sweeping camera move that closes in on his face and reveals wholly it's Henry Fonda. Yes, indeed, one of Hollywood's all-time great decent married. Fellas, good old Hank here, dropped into the single best piece of against typecasting that has ever been perpetrated, or likely ever will be, given how calculated image control is these days and how even the unlikeliest celebrity casting choices have the unpleasant tang of a marketing decision. At any rate, Fon's turn as the deeply cruel, calculating Frank is among his best performances. I will not go so far as to call it his very best, simply because it is unusual for him. But freed from the manacles of a stand-up model of good citizenship, the actor was able to tap into a reservoir of coldness that is quite surprising and exciting. From this point on, Once Upon a Time in the West keeps on expanding and expanding to include McBain's widow, Jill Claudia Cardinale, a tough, beautiful New Orleans, and Cheen Jason Rorts, an affable bandit who gets framed for the massacre at the McBain Ranch, and that most beloved of tropes in Death of the Frontier films, the building of a cross-country railroad, along with all the corruption and murder that entails. It's not terrifically original as a story. It falls into a spate of westerns in the late 60s and early 70s that dealt with the coming of civilization to the Old West, most prominently including Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Wild Bunch. But the tone with which it tells its story isn't quite like any of the other films on the same subject. The easiest way to describe it, I think, is in the context of the Dollars trilogy that Leone had so recently completed. Those films, particularly the good, the bad and the ugly, are often noted for their sweeping mythic quality. There is a distinct non-reality to the world of TGTBDU, which feels at times more like the landscape of hell than the American Southwest. And certainly the character Eastwood plays in those movies is a folkloric figure rather than a traditionally dramatic one. Once Upon a Time in the West is somewhat like an epilogue to the Dollars trilogy, in that it combines the legendary quality of those films with a more realistic period film quality. I would describe it as the difference between mythic and epic. Harmonica is very much like Eastwood's character from the earlier films, a figure rather than a character, but he is surrounded by people in a story about events that began before our movie started and end after it concludes. Can you ever imagine the stories of Eastwood's films continuing on in any direction, whereas the current film takes place in a historic continuum, and it doesn't quite know what to do with Harmonica, who keeps slicing into the story at angles, if you will, interjecting himself into a narrative world where a fable like he is cannot comfortably exist. Frank is the same kind of figure, only he tries to force himself into the world by means of violence and destruction, the tools of the same mythic westerns that he and Harmonica stepped out of, but he ends up dying for it. Harmonica survives, but only after he's given a backstory at the end of the film and thus reabsorbed, as it were, into the film's more grounded reality. Much as Lee Van Cleef's character, and for a few dollars more with his own grounded backstory, is the only real character in that film, the film's primary flaw, for it is undoubtedly a flawed movie more so than TGTBT, although I think its heights are higher. And on the whole, it's a great deal more fascinating, is that Leone, abetted by cinematographer Tonino Delicali, is a little bit too intoxicated with the creation of self-consciously pictorial imagery and uses them somewhat indiscriminately. The shot of harmonica in the foreground facing off against the three assassins is reminiscent of the three-way standoff in wide shots in TGBTU and is one of the best shots in the movie. But after God knows how many shots of characters framed by doorways or of characters in the foreground watching over the action like a god, it's hard to shake the sense that Leone is not so much punctuating his movie as indulging in beauty for its own sake. Assens got that's an awfully hard one to complain about, for beauty is after all beautiful. Still, the extreme discipline that went into TGTB2 has been replaced by something a bit more indulgent, which is disappointing, if certainly not film-breaking. The same with the script, which Leone co with Sergio Donati from A Story Leone crafted alongside two future giants of the Italian film industry, Bernardo Bertolucci and Dario Argento. It is remarkably well paced for the bulk of it, especially in the first hour, where every scene seems to goon forages without ever lagging. But there are scenes scattered in there that don't seem to do much good but extend the running time. Though the only one I'd happily see removed is the moment in which Frank and Jill have sex. That's actually a good segue into the last point I'd like to raise about the film and what it says about Leone's career, which is the function of women in it. Cardinalized Jill is the first significant female character in Leone films since the Colossus of Rhodes, back when he was just a hack. Even then, it's worth noting that the female lead there was revealed to be the villain. Here she is an Exor who is the only one of the four leads that the film can't figure out. Harmonica is the taciturn moral man who gets things done that need doing. Frank is the evil avatar of greed and rapine. Chini's a well-meaning lapsed romantic. Jill is seen as the rugged knows what she once has sought, who turns into a lost and confused victim before ending, as I don't even know what to make of the last few scenes and the way they present her character. Domesticity is praised that much is clear, but the degree to which Jill is expected to be a traditional woman at the end is wildly hard to make out. I get the impression that Leone set out to make her a strong action girl type and lost this nerve, eventually shoving her off stage altogether. Despite having took billing, Cardinal gets the least face time of the main actors, and it's worth noting the strong woman from the East, a stock character, has to be made before she can join Leone's boy club, and that the only moment in the last half of the film where she gets to express any real autonomy is a scene in which she, the villain, to protect herself, a scene that could easily be cut without damaging the story much at all. I don't know if there's any lesson that can be drawn from this, other than that Leone was profoundly uncomfortable with female characters and could only deal with them by framing the mass masculine fantasies. The cold-blooded femme fatale in Colossus, a gorgeous tomboy hooker here. Once Upon a Time in the West gets enough so amazingly right in its depiction of the waning days of the frontier that I'm not inclined to make much of it, though it is a considerably sour note in what is otherwise one of the pinnacles of world cinema. More detail, I'm not well versed in spaghetti westerns, but I certainly do not need someone to tell me that Sergio Leone's film is a hot, sprawling epic. That's an understatement, if there ever was one. The cast, the score, the visuals, everything about it fits together so marvelously. All the moving parts succeed in developing a majestic piece of cinema that really is a Western, not to use that word lightly. Recently, I saw Tarantino's Django Unchained, which of course pays homage to the spaghetti western, and it undoubtedly exhibits the Tarantino style. However, Leone's film lingers as well. But with Once Upon a Time in the West, I didn't mind. The film, after all, has a cold open that lasts 13 minutes, and Master Fitty spends staring at Jack Ellam and Woody Strode, except the way Leone captures it all, I don't really mind. In fact, I thoroughly enjoy it. Whereas Tarantino's film felt like it was dawdling, Leone's film didn't seem to dawdle. It was just stylish in its makeup. The pacing Adams feels like a lazy Sunday afternoon, underlined by dread for something to come. Then for a brief blip, the trouble comes violently, and then just like that, it's gone. Everything's back to the status quo, except this structure makes every killing and gunfight seem all the more dynamic. The main players are Claudia Cardinale, James Bronson, Jason Robards, and Henry Fonda. Cardinale, of course, is one of the icons of cinema, and here she feels like a wonderful embodiment of this woman who helps bring civility to this land. Whether it's simply her immense beauty or some emotion behind her eyes, it's hard not to watch her every movement. First, as she learns she's a widow, next, when she is introduced to the other main players, and finally, when she sees her dead husband's dreams forming all around her. James Bronson, as the aloof but deadly harmonica, has to be this coolest. He hardly has to say anything because that ominous harmonica music is his calling card. Every time we hear it, we know he's around, and also his eyes are so expressive. Sergio Leone is never squeamish about lingering on his stars' faces. In fact, that paired with landscapes is one of his signatures that helps define his iconic style. The contrasts stand out, and the interludes, often lacking dialogue, somehow help make his characters even cooler. They take on an air of mystery, and in the case of harmonica, we only understand his vendetta near the very end. It all starts to make sense. Robards is the outlaw, Chen, who is pinned with the murder of McBain's wife and children. Our posse is after him and his gang, but he was actually pinned for the rap. He's cast in the light of a scruffy anti-hero in Robards' Plow. Ice him rough around the edges, but most importantly with a heart. He's one of the few characters who seems to get Jill Hecknos enough that none of the men around her are worthy of her, because she is a special class of woman, in spite of what her past may say. Perhaps the most striking of casting choices was Henry Fonda, because by now he was well along in his career and most certainly best known for his plain-speaking heroes. That's what makes Frank such a great character, because dressed in all black and armed with a revolver, he guns someone down the first moment we see him. It's a shock, and it sets the tone for the rest of the film. He goes on to backstab his sickly employer and continues to put pressure on Mrs. McBain to give up her land. It goes so far as taking advantage of her at her home. He's a monster. But the part is such the antithesis of the Henry Fonda we know, making it a pure stroke of genius. At least for me, you soon forget about the dubbing of certain characters and just allow yourself to become fully engaged in the dynamic West as envisioned by Leone. After all, since there isn't a whole lot of dialogue in some scenes, it loses its importance. It's often about the desolately depicted visuals. The wry smile on a face, the buzz of a pestering fly, or the aching of a windmill. That's another thing this film puts sound uses so wonderfully, whether it's the harmonica Morricone's engaging score or dioitic sounds. In fact, the score evolves and reprise in concordance with the pacing of the film. It can be ominous, it can be playful, and sometimes it's non-existent. When it all comes down to it, we get the final showdown between harmonica and Frank, but the film is a lot larger than that. After all, we have been following multiple characters. Jill finally sees the world around here coming to life, and she has weathered the Wild West as an independent woman, as for Cheen Heens as a tragic care of sorts. There's no question Leone's film, arguably his greatest alongside The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, helps define a version of the West with iconic characterizations placed up against striking pictorials. It's one of those films that, despite the length, never feels like a labor. A smile is constantly forming on my face to mirror the visage of James Bronson. I really wish I could play the harmonica now. It's so ridiculously cool. That's what I really took away from this film, the opening. End scene of Once Upon a Time in the West is a tour de force of cinema. Three men greet a man harmonica off a train. It sounds simple, but the scene is slowly drawn out, and then tension builds and builds. The atmosphere developed through an amazing soundscape of creaking fans, water dripping in the wind. It is deafening and absolutely superb. It hooked me. The rest of the film also has great audio too, mostly through Ennio Morricone's amazing score. Morricone is known for a wealth of films, but the harmonica piece from this film is hauntingly famous. But the whole score is some of his best work. Like the opening, the film is also quite slow in its pace. I had mixed feeling about this. It helps establish the stillness and contestant tension of the Old West. But at the same time, I did find a lot of the film dragged, in my opinion. It was a little dull at points. The film is beautifully shot, the sky, the desert, it is beautiful, and the colors are so vivid. The acting is strong too. People rave about Charles Bronson and, of course, Henry Fonda playing a villain, and they both do very well, truly. But for my money, I love the performance of Jason Robards. Claudia Cardinale is good too. Although I do find it odd to have some actors speaking their own native languages and then having it dubbed later. I think my biggest problem is with the narrative. Characters betray each other at times, change allegiances, and seem to understand each other much more than I could follow, which is a bit of a flaw. I was lost at times. If brilliant visuals and brilliant music is enough, then this film is for you, and this is indeed enough for some people. But for me, I wanted more from the narrative. This film, directed by Sergio Leone, screenplay by Sergio Donati, Sergio Leone, story by Dario Argento, Bernardo Bertoi. Sergio Leone, produced by Fulvio Morsella, starring Claudia Cardinale, Henry Fonda, Jason Robards, Charles Bronson, Gabrielle Fazzetti, Woody Strode, Jackie Lamb, Lionel. Stander Paulo Stopper, Frank Wolf, Keenan W. Cinematography, Tonino Deli Colli. Edited by Nino Barali, music by Ennio Morricone. Production companies: Euro International Films, Paramount Pictures, Raffin Cinematographica, Fanania San States. Release dates: December 20th, 1968 in Rome, December 21st, 1968 in Italy, May 28th, 1969 in New York. Running time 171 minutes. Italian version 165 minutes. International version 140 minutes. American theatrical version countries: Italy, United States. Languages: Italian, English. Budget: $5 million. Box office: $5.3 million. 40 million tickets. So friends, this is the detailed review of the film Once Upon a Time in the West and some interesting facts about this film. Hope you like this video. Dog of her video, a like and subscribe to her channel to watch.